my J-Knights, I am the Austen reviewer. Today I wanted to quickly cover off a subject to do with engagement, since I'm planning on covering some things about that in some subsequent videos. I also wasn't feeling very well last week, which is why I didn't post anything, so I beg your forgiveness for that. But I thought I would very quickly touch on this rather funny thing that we see happening, and it actually causes quite a bit of conflict in most of the Jane Austen novels, and that is how an engagement could be acceptably broken off. One of the most glaring examples of this is in Sense and Sensibility, where Edward Ferrars cannot propose to the woman that he is in love with, Eleanor, because he is already engaged to another woman who he's no longer in love with. Now, the common question that people will usually bring up as a fault of this story is that, well, why doesn't he just break off the engagement? She's not a particularly honorable girl. He doesn't entirely know that at this point, but why can't he just break it off if he doesn't love her anymore? I mean, it's not really fair to her to trap her in a marriage where he's not in love with her, is it? Well, according to the society at the time, no, he couldn't, because it was not honorable under basically any circumstances for a man to break off an engagement with a woman. So the only way you could acceptably, in that social setting, have an engagement broken would be by the woman. So in order for their engagement to be dissolved, Lucy would have to be the one to break it off, which is why she asks Eleanor about it. And while Eleanor would like her to, she also feels the risk that she's putting herself in that particular position, because Lucy is actually using that to actually bait Eleanor to figure out what her feelings are for Edward, which is kind of a cruel thing, and really she gets the short end of the stick in like 90% of that novel, which is kind of sad. It also comes into play in Persuasion, because though he hasn't proposed to her, because the expectation of her family and her friends and what he understands to be her expectation as well, he realizes that he is sort of honor-bound to ask Louisa Musgrove to accept him, because he's led her on to believe that that is going to be his intention. What are you licking? It comes up in Mansfield Park as well, though in a slightly different way, since it doesn't as directly impact the main character, or one of the main characters. And that is when Sir Thomas Bertram comes back from Antigua and actually gets to meet the man that his daughter is engaged to. He wants the engagement to stand because it's a very good connection for the family, but he can see that she doesn't love him, and he can see that he's not exactly the kind of man with an intellect that can really handle his daughter. He can tell that it's not going to be a good match. Socially, it's an excellent match, but from their actual personalities and from wanting to marry a man of sense, it's far from the right thing. So while he does not personally, I guess, from a societal perspective, he doesn't want the engagement to be broken off, but from a personal side, he also wants to protect his daughter from this. So he gives her an out. He tells her that she can refuse the engagement, she can break it off, and he will back her for it. She's not going to get in trouble for it. He's not going to hold her accountable and stuff. In a way, he doesn't want to, but at the same time, he also knows that this is the responsible thing to do as her father. She chooses not to do this because she wants the social side. She's fully aware that they're not a good match. But she is determined that she will be happy in this situation. She wants her own house and her own society, so that's why she goes through with it. Which is kind of an unfortunate happening, but well. That also comes into play when Lady Catherine goes to visit Elizabeth. Because as Elizabeth says, her coming to see her would be more of a confirmation of an engagement if one existed, as opposed to not. But what she wanted to do was, she knew that if they were engaged, Darcy would not be able to escape some societal scorn by breaking off an engagement if it existed. So she wanted Elizabeth to do it. That's why she went in the first place, to express all her anger, and it was all to convince her to break off an engagement if it existed, or when she found out that it didn't, to try to prevent her from forming one in the first place. We see this in a slightly different way in Northanger Abbey, where the behavior of Isabella Thorpe leads her brother, Miss Morland's brother, and pretty much everyone else involved with them to realize that she's not going to really honor their engagement. So in a way, He kind of breaks it off, but it was initiated by her. He did have some societal context to take it as being a dismissal, if you will, of the engagement. So that's where it plays into there. Let's see. Now in Emma. That might be, give me a moment to think about it, because that could be the only place that this doesn't come into play. Nope, it does. It does. It comes into play in the characters of Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax. I'm realizing now that there's a lot of spoilers in this, so really late spoiler alert, I suppose, but should I really need to put on a spoiler alert on novels that are more than 200 years old? I don't know, maybe. But anyway, they've had an engagement for a very long time. This is not news to anyone that's actually read or seen any of the versions of Emma. So they've been engaged, but because she doesn't feel that Frank is really respecting her or really loves her anymore, she writes him a letter explaining her feelings. He writes one back to explain that no, he really does still feel for her and to apologize for his behavior. He forgets to send it though. So she sends a letter breaking off their engagement. He then falls over himself in order to re-secure her affection and explain himself that he didn't mean to snub her like that. So in all the novels, this actually comes into play, which is kind of funny. But it was a very distinct social thing at the time. There is a story, which there is debate about whether it's true or not, that Jane Austen at one point in her life accepted a proposal from a man only to refuse or dissolve it the next morning because she had some regrets. There is debate about whether that actually happened or not, because it is a secondhand account many, many, many years after the fact. And there's not much for support in her personal letters of it actually happening. It's more of a story that her nephew, I believe, got from an older relative from way, way back in Jane's earlier life. So while it does also demonstrate the same principle in a real life example, there is still debate about whether or not it actually happened. So I don't feel comfortable considering the evidence for and against, and knowing how poor the human memory actually is about recalling a lot of that kind of stuff. I'm not really inclined to take that as being fact. It's certainly a very interesting tidbit if it actually happened, and there have been a lot of movies and novels and adaptations that have actually paid homage to it, which is one of the things I really hate about some of the Mansfield Park adaptations, but we'll get to those eventually. So it is an interesting thing to watch, but if you ever wondered, like, well, if they don't love the other person, why don't they just dissolve it? Well, it's because only the woman could really socially acceptably be the one to end an engagement. So I hope you found that video interesting. Thank you for watching. I remain as ever till the next time we meet, the Austen Reviewer. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe for more content, share with your friends to help my channel gain a bit more exposure. I would appreciate it if you would have a look at my Patreon. It's not required by any means, but it does help